Listeners everywhere, welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan, the weekly fix for your screen addiction and a trusted source for discussion of all things film and television. Please keep in mind that for the purposes of this podcast, Joel and Ryan are not acting as journalists, but rather fellow moving picture enthusiasts. All of their opinions should be taken as such. Also, please be warned that while Joel and Ryan may seem like petulant children, they are, in fact, adults who may occasionally use adult language. While they promise to bleep out all the worst words, it's a good bet you will still understand what they were saying. And now, with no further ado, here's Joel and Ryan.
Hello, friends. There's no need to be suspicious. It's just the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. Welcome back for another week. I am Joel.
And I'm Ryan.
And we're super happy to have you back. Ryan and I doing old school movie show again. Just the two of us.
Rocking it old school.
And that's true. I believe next week, though, we are going to get to have next week. It's 2 weeks from now. We
don't know what the hell we're doing next week. If you got any ideas out there, send them on.
Reach out to us at Ask Joel and Ryan on Twitter and Instagram.
We came up with a cool backup plan for an episode, which we are using this week, so we no longer have that.
That is indeed, and we almost had we are really close to someday being able to do this in person again, where Ryan and I are sharing the same room.
Perhaps
we are both on our way to being vaccinated. So this is an exciting week.
Yeah, I'm actually feeling the effects of that right now.
Are you? Yeah, me too. Well, I got my second one. Ryan got his first one. So that's why we had this backup plan for a show.
I have a headache and it kind of hurt everywhere, and I'm kind of dizzy.
Yeah, I am.
Small price to pay for getting vaccinated, but
yep, I am wiped out. I have been. This is the first time I have been vertical really all day. And as soon as this podcast is over, I'll be lying back down.
Going back to bed.
Indeed, but no,
pad.
But we love you, dear listener.
Yeah,
so very much that we still wanted to talk some movies.
Yeah,
and I think we got some fun movies. I know we have some fun movies to talk about today. But first, we did want to. This is something that has come up on the show before, and Ryan has always been very consistent in and I should say concise. He's been very concise about our viewpoint towards what
concise and consistent.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's true. But I was trying to think of the word concise, and I said consistent.
Sure,
both apply.
but both work.
Yeah, they do. The obviously the Academy Award nominations came out last week. In addition to the Academy Award nominations coming out last week, the Razzie Awards came out last week, Razzie nominations. Maybe we shouldn't even be giving them oxygen, but we hate the Razzies.
What we say about them at this point makes any difference.
That's true. But we hate the Razzies. The Razzies are just mean and dumb.
They're stupid, vacuous, celebrity-oriented hate machine, and it's not as toxic. They have a little fun with their degrading of stuff throughout the years in a way that like Twitter hate is a lot more toxic and scary, I think, but they're still entirely negative, and they revel in that in a gross sort of modern day TMZ way. And I just think they're basically awful. I don't think they serve any useful purpose at all.
I learned a little bit of history behind them, that, it was a publicist who thought it would be kind of funny to try to take down, it was one of those years where somebody who was up for best actor or something also did kind of a crummy movie that year, and so they thought it'd be kind of fun to just sort of poke fun at, and maybe poke fun at the Hollywood elite system, even though this publicist was part of it, but just it was all in good fun at the start, theoretically, right. and then there was that brief little window of time where it was really kind of everyone was in on it, and it was really fun. Like that year, Halle Berry accepted in person a Razzie Award the day before she got her Best Actor or Actress award for Monsters Ball. There was that brief little window of time where everyone, but now it is just there's no purpose for it. We live in such a.
It's had to keep up with a noisy kind of negative, much crueler pop culture conversation, and it's always been a stupid thing, but now it's a stupid, and like you say, it's just kind of mean spirited and stupid. What I object about it's not so much its existence, because somebody was going to do something like that at some point. There's so many award shows, there might as well be a, here's where you messed up kind of. But we just fundamentally don't believe in that worst lists, worst dressed. It's just there's nothing. That we plenty of criticism comes out of me over the courses of us talking about the things we like. So there's just no point in spending time being driven purely by the negative. And I don't like it for that. And I never will. And I really don't like the way it's treated, like the industry honors, that where you really hear a lot more about the Razzies than you do the New York Critics Circle Awards and stuff. It's like, or the Screen Actors Guild Awards or whatever, where you really do have peers judging peers and stuff like that. There's way too many award shows, but at least there's some legitimacy. Even People's Choice, even who wins or loses, whatever, singing competitions. It's like, that's still a positivity, in a way. So that's how. That's why I don't like it.
Yeah, and we've talked on this show before about storytelling in this type of medium. To tell a story this way, there are so many different elements that go into trying to successfully tell a story. Frankly, it's kind of amazing that anything comes out coherently.
On the level of something like Wonder Woman 1984, which I don't know if that's on the Razzies list, but that's certainly caught a lot of heat. But with that kind of money and that sort of just massive amount of crew credits and creators and things at the end, I mean, it is a wonder some of these work out as well as they do.
Yeah.
And our unwillingness to take things for what they are too, I think that's on us as audience members. But the Razzies don't help with that. They're like any other thing. Like we were talking about, those VH1 countdown shows, or just any of those weird cable shows where they're just like, let's go back to 1985. And they're all designed to reduce something to its lowest common denominator, to therefore label it clearly and cleanly, and then judge it for what it is. Yeah. And that's we just choose not to view this stuff like that. It is complicated, and we revel in the complexities of it. So I don't like using conventional wisdom to just write something off. I think that's miserable. And we really try not to do that here. And that's the Razzies' whole cottage industry.
Yep. So boo Razzies, boo. That's all. I think that's all we need to say about that. So next up,
what made you think about that? Did something actually stick in your craw? Because you wanted to bring this up again.
Yeah. I mean, there is a particular.
Not to put you on the spot, but I'm just curious why.
No, I don't want to mention this actor's name because we have a future show idea where we've talked about talking about some current actors that deserve some love, maybe a little bit more recognition than they have, and one of them got put on this Razzies list, and she is like listed amongst all of these like multiple Academy Award nominated actors, and she I was listening to a conversation with her, and she was like, I don't even know why. I mean, I guess maybe there's a compliment in there that they think that I'm on par with these people, but I'm still an up and coming actor, and to be put on a list where they're just making fun of what I did.
Yeah, just ridiculing you.
Yeah, ridiculing and saying
making fun is one thing, ridiculing is another thing, and that's the business of the Razzies.
And when you're a Glenn Close, a Meryl Streep, and Amy Adams, and all stuff, a little knock like that where you get put in, no one cares. In fact, anyone goes down, that's when you get the little chuckle laugh of, oh, the Razzies. But when you put an up and coming actor who's just trying to make it, and it's not like she had 14 projects that she had the option of doing and chose this one and was an executive producer on it no, she was just trying to get a part and trying to do the best job that she could. So to put her on this list it really stuck in my craw, because by all accounts she's a good person and I find an incredibly funny performer. So I'll talk about her whenever we do our fun. Let's give some other actors some love.
Right now we're calling it our favorite underrated actor, but underrated is such a stupid, useless term too.
Yeah,
it's hard to.
So we're
try and come up with a better name.
Yeah, we're still figuring out what that one's going to be called, but
But we all have Joel and I have our favorites, what we consider somewhat unsung performers who we would kind of want to bring to the surface and shine the spotlight of love on. So we're gonna try,
which is why we geeked out so hard when we got J.O. Sanders to come on.
Yeah, because he's exactly the kind of guy he's exactly the kind of dude we're talking about. Exactly, yeah, totally. Jay had a good shot at being on that list, even if one of us didn't know him personally.
So anyway, so that's why it really did stick in my craw this week more than, and because the nominations came out, I wanted to, again, reiterate, because Ryan has been, again,
well, they come up as sort of in our little trivia bits, and every time you see them come up, I wince and go, let's not give them any, let's just not, who cares about that? I always, it's not that I don't, it's not that I mind it too terribly much, but every time I'm always like, why are we talking about the Razzies? I hate them. Yeah. It'll happen again in the future too. And me hating on them is part of the fun. We might as well just diss on them.
We've toyed with ideas. Yeah, we've toyed with ideas for shows of like, singular moment that almost ruins an otherwise good movie, and we've talked about these sort of things a little bit, but
and maybe we'll still do them. I don't know. The point isn't that we're always going to be rejoicing and Mr. Positive, because we're not, but we just at least try to celebrate the stuff you like. There's so much out there that is awesome and that moved us. We all have different opinions about that stuff, but let's just do that. And if we do like you say, if we do a negative list, or if we do a negative highlight show, even that will try and be, we're not trying to bring anybody down, truly.
We're still trying to celebrate what this
I think we've earned the right to do that every once in a while. I think people understand what we're all about. So
yep, the 6 of you out there that regularly listen, thank you, by the way.
Here's the movie show with Joel and Ryan. Salute to the 6 of you. Thanks, guys.
We love you. All right. So next up, you watched a couple films this week that you wanted to give a shout out to.
Just real quick. Last night in order, I watched Fair Game by Doug Liman, and then The Green Zone by Paul Greengrass. And those 2 directors are the guys who make the Bourne films, basically. And they each made really sort of serious thrillers about, they're both to one degree or another about the utter exactly zero, none whatsoever weapons of mass destruction that were found in Iraq after our invasion there. Nothing was found. Like no evidence that there was anything ever there was found. And The Green Zone is about this I don't know if it's Marines or the just the regular Army Rangers or what, but it's this captain played by Matt Damon who's charged with investigating all these leads that they got and finding these places and securing them. And of course, they keep sending him out to one after another, and there's nothing there. There's absolutely nothing there. At one point, they have him in the middle of a town square, just digging holes in the ground. And this Iraqi comes up to them and he's like, you think if they put a bunch of weapons here under the ground and in front of all these people, that people wouldn't know that they were there? I mean, it's what you're doing. You just are fools. You're absurd. Mm-hmm. And he becomes sort of a translator, and the movie becomes this thriller. It's the hunt for, I'm not going to say his name wrong, but Asghar Mahari or something like that. Sorry.
The general, are you talking about the Muhammad al-Rawi?
Al-Rawi, thank you. That's the guy that they are going after. And there's sort of two sides of the same team that are looking for this guy. One who wants the truth and one who really doesn't want any truth to come out. And that's an interesting movie. It's got plenty of excitement in it. It's both of these films, you kind of know how they turn out. So there's no real suspense in that. But seeing a soldier on the ground, also Amy, help me out, Amy.
Oh, I was right there.
She plays a Wall Street Journal.
Amy Ryan.
I should have been able to remember that. Amy Ryan plays a Wall Street Journal, writer whose work was at least in part responsible for selling the war to people. And both her and this soldier and this sort of grizzled old CIA guy are all having this sort of crisis of conscience over what they think they're there for and what is worth going to war for and what isn't. And while they're there, just in the however many days they're doing this work, that you see the narrative about what it's even all about start to change in ways that the narrative has always changed. It's well, don't worry, we'll find it, we're right. And then it's, well, even if we don't find it, look, we had to do this. And then doesn't matter if we found it, we're doing this now. And those steps away from why we invaded a country, it's stunning. And the other, Fair Game is basically the story of Valerie Plame and her. Yeah. It's based on both her and her husband's books, basically. So it's very much from their point of view, story of what happened to them when the White House chose to, through the print media, to out an active CIA agent, and the real human damage that was done as a result of that, and how that story and how the definition of what they were got stamped on them.
Yeah.
She had multiple operations without deep cover operatives, with local assets, basically, who are just people with families and stuff trying to do the right thing covertly. Her whole deal was that she cultivated these people. She got them to trust her. If she could put pressure on them, if there was pressure to be put on them, she would do it to get super valuable intelligence that was just completely askewed in the lead up to the war in Iraq. And then what happened to her when they got the conservative media dogs sucked on them. I mean, it's sickening to watch a family of qualified, smart people who love America and have only ever done what they can to serve it just get hammered in the press and in public. It's a really, really good movie. That it's not a super pleasant movie. So, I'm sure that's why these weren't big hits. None of these post 9/11 movies did well. None of us, me included, really wanted to be watching movies like The Kingdom, and there's a whole bunch of, there's one with Jake Gyllenhaal, what's it called? And Reese Witherspoon, Rendition.
Yeah.
That's a stunning film, but it's a downer. This is us. And what we're doing just a few years ago, and now what we're doing, even compared to that, is equally terrible. So I get it. What Joel said, United 93 is great, but I'm never going to watch that again.
Right.
I sympathize, but also Paul Greengrass, by the way.
Yeah.
But those are worth considering because there weren't too many. Maybe Lions for Lambs wasn't so great, but there weren't many bad movies made in reaction to that, what was going on in the world, and they aren't all liberal Lambs, propaganda pieces either. Peter Berg made a movie about how we deal with people in the Middle East. And he's hardly a liberal, you know, a lot, but he's a relatively thoughtful filmmaker, or was at the time. So, you know, Clint Eastwood made one too that's interesting. So I highly recommend Green Zone and Fair Game. I would probably watch them in that order and not the order I watched them in, but it's up to you. Again, these are big blockbuster filmmakers who are taking a moment out, lowering their budget a little bit to make something that is important, and you can't help them be big box office hits at this point, but you can throw a little support their way and they'll make you smarter, more critical thinker from watching them and what else. That's really an awesome thing for a movie to accomplish.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Okay, so kind of along these lines, or not too a distant of an adjacent turn here, is our main topic for today. We are going to talk about spy movies, but this isn't a giant James Bond 3-part massive ranking.
You already have that.
That is available to you. We are going to go with today we're going to talk about the movies of an author
in television.
Movies and television series.
The screen adaptations.
The screen adaptations of the one David John Moore Cornwell. Everyone loves a Cornwell novel on their shelf. They just might not know it. But no, John. Sir David is best known by his nom de plume, his pen name John le Carré. And which I didn't know that there was apparently there's no reason like there's no rules against you can write books and stuff even if you're an agent of MI5 or MI6. You just can't use your name.
He was still working for them when he wrote his first novel, or when he wrote what he considers his first real novel. He had a couple of, like Michael Crichton and some other writers, he had a couple run-up test novels that aren't even John le Carré novels. But he was still working for MI6 at the time, and so they got to read it and decide whether he could publish it or not. And he says about that novel, it's the first movie we're going to talk about, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, that he just, it's hard to imagine where I would be if my bosses at the time just said, nah, sorry, we're not going to let you do this. I mean, he doesn't consider himself a spy. He considers himself a novelist, which is about right,
Right.
But he was a guy working at the embassy in Germany during the Cold War who was secretly, covertly to everyone there, everyone in his own embassy, everybody everyone he knew in his life, except for a couple of people back in London. He was a covert agent. He was watchdogging his team. He was watchdogging the other team. That's not a glamorous spying job, but he was with Berlin, it's the heart of the thing during the Cold War. Really, that was there, not Moscow so much. That was ground zero. That's where we were, just right on the other side of the fence from each other, and physically interacting with each other in a way that the folks in California were not interacting with the people in St. Petersburg,
Yeah.
And he's used that experience to deliver 30 or so of the, like I said in his obit, a few weeks back, not the most exciting spy novels by any stretch, but consistently the most believable ones, because because everything in his stories right down the line, and we'll talk about not all of them, but the majority of them,
he's a big chunk
the most significant ones we'll talk about are absolutely ring true in a way that demonstrate the complications of the soul and the difficulties of life and all the great sort of human examinations that we do to each other in writing. It's all in his stuff. Second only as a British writer to probably to Graham Greene in terms of this style of storytelling that really gets to the human bits in a way that can change you, can shake you up as a reader. That's neat.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's kind of like that the idea of when like a person goes in and wants to be a cop because they've grown up and watching, you know, car chases and running the criminal down and blah blah blah, right. Or, you know, I'm gonna be a spy because boy, I watch all these James Bond films, and then, or like when you're a cop and you show up and you realize that no, most of your day is spent doing paperwork and shuffling stuff around and going and trying to interview people and get that, you know, and it's not all of that.
As a side note, my favorite review of David Fincher's Zodiac was they should have called this movie Filing in the 70s.
Yeah.
And what he was trying to say was, this movie is boring. It's really boring, which it is boring to a degree, but it's also, it rings true when you watch it. And it rings true when you watch it. It's an attempt to make a story out of serial killer events, of which Fincher's very famous Seven is the opposite. That is literally a Hollywood serial killer made from out of Hollywood pixie dust. To spook you and to make you feel certain things, but it isn't ring true at all. That movie's just it's total BS.
Yeah,
doesn't mean it's not a good movie, but this was his answer to that was, well, here's what this kind of thing does to you, it does to a person. And in that case, a group of people. Le Carré's stories tend to be very focused on one central character, but that's what his, I mean, whether he set it down as an edict, that's what his work does best.
Yeah.
And that's really, really valuable and interesting in my opinion.
Yeah. You found that great quote that he said about, he talks about how the spies that he writes are different than like the superhero spies like James Bond. He said, a mostly aging, weary, unromantic lot prone to distressing stomach ailments and having trouble with their wives. So that's what you're gonna get. That, you know, that's what these in this case, these men
that's
are.
What he was to some degree, and that's what the people he worked with all were. And he really shines a light on that in a way. Well, there's still plenty of sneaking around and certainly just enough in almost every one of these, just enough conventional adventure to get you through, which it's just typically they're just the right mix of the two things, because who's the guy who created Bond again?
Ian Fleming.
Yeah, he was a spy too during World War II, but he knew this. He was using his experience when writing Bond too, but it was a send up. He was desperately trying to entertain people and just sprinkle enough authenticity into it that you could allow your suspension of disbelief so you could kick back and enjoy yourself. But Le Carré is on a whole different level in terms of what that work really was, and I'll just tell you right now, we're Joel's loaded up with some plot synopsises for us, which are going to be very helpful in you guys who maybe haven't seen a lot of these, tell them apart. But I'm not going to analyze these plots very much. I'm going to partly because I can't, and the reason I can't is because they're really complicated, and you can't with two sentences say what a John le Carré plot is. That's not possible.
Right,
you can say what the setup is. And then what happens
Yeah, these are spy films, and so those reveals, those twists and turns are a giant part of the plot. And
they really are unconventionally surprising, and they really are difficult, and many of them, sometimes depending on the novel, all of them can be downbeat sort of turns for the worse. It really isn't important how the mission, or it isn't, I shouldn't say it's not important, but it's less important how the mission turns out, who gets away free, than who's been changed and how by these events.
Right.
So we're going to dive into that more specifically.
So we're going to be talking about these in relative chronological order. However, we still sort of feel like we can call this a countdown of John le Carré adaptations.
10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
A sort of not a countdown.
It's not a countdown, but it should feel like a countdown.
Yeah. So we're gonna
start, given the subject matter, is kind of perfect.
Yeah. So we're gonna start with 1965, and the first, it was his first big novel. It was obviously the one that put him on the
breakthrough novel. It's considered one of the better novels in the English language. So it shows up on many top 100 lists. It is by several people considered, although his novels may have gotten better and better, but at the time it was revelatory in that you really felt like you were reading something real.
Yeah.
Which the escapist spy books of the era, the 60s, were anything but that.
Yeah, and this was fast turnaround because the book came out, I believe, in 63. And so then 2 years later, we get the movie adaptation of it.
Yep, immediately optioned.
Yeah.
Martin Ritt is the director. And relatively early in his, although he directed a lot of movies throughout his career, but relatively early going in his career. It stars Richard Burton at the very, very height of Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor mania in England, and to a lesser degree in America, but definitely in England. And it was all shot, Germany for England, basically. It was all shot in the UK and in Ireland and such.
So this one is so this one was the first sort of movie that established the spy game not as a life of glamour and adventure, but as a world blanketed by paranoia and suspicion, which you'll hear us talk about a lot.
Right. Burton plays a guy who, right after the Berlin Wall comes up, is kind of brought home and just doesn't have, he's a typical, I don't know, he's even more morose, frankly, than a typical John le Carré actor, who usually are, well, it's a mixed bag. But this guy is a war-grizzled veteran spy master who knows nothing else and has no other meaning in his life, and insists on being given another mission. And he's given sort of a hopeless one.
Yeah, there's
right as he's starting to fall in love with this mousy librarian down the street, played brilliantly by Claire Bloom.
And
there's a sadness in that right as he's like his life, you're not sure that relationship could not work out at all, but there's this glimmer of something else, some other sort of life for him that's just that he's on the precipice of when he sort of dives back into this mission. And the mission isn't you have to go here and find out what these guys are doing and blow this thing up to save the world. It's you have to go there, be interviewed and interrogated ruthlessly for days and days and days, and you have to keep your head above you enough to slowly leak our cover story to these bad guys until they believe you've made enough mistakes that they believe what you're pretending to hide, the misinformation. That's the mission.
Yeah.
And we watched that happening. That's also the movie to a certain degree, but it goes it gets out of hand and goes even further than that. And the woman that he just met, who he begs to have them not get involved, gets completely involved. It's the first novel appearance and screen appearance of his signature character, George Smiley. He was a very small part in this.
Yep.
But so we'll talk about him more in a bit, but it's that first appearance of that guy who kind of is the guy behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad. And Burton, you know, we talked about on our anniversary show, I brought it up. In fact, like I wanted to get it out while Brian was sitting there and had to listen to me on my own show. That was kind of mean. Where he had to, at least to some degree, politely nod along with me without making too big enough of an argument. So, you know, that was deliberate on my part. Sorry. I mean, I didn't plan it ahead of time, but I knew what I was doing when I was doing it. I love Richard Burton. People call him like a wooden, stilted, sort of that British stage actor that has no personality on screen. But I really think when you go back, I think when you are that, you come across like a person in old films, which, you know, this is something Rob will appreciate. And I would guess, I can't say that, I can't speak for our buddy Rob Dunkelberger, friend of the show, super fan.
Yep.
But I would guess he loves The Spy Who Came In From the Cold because it's exactly his kind of old classic movie. But what it has at the heart of it that a lot of those films don't have is this guy who's Burton's given it a go. I mean, he's this alcoholic. There's a little melodrama in the film, but those moments work because the rest of the time he's playing things so close to the chest and stuff, and that's why it was a wonderful, melancholy, it's just a really human thing to watch. I'd never seen this movie. I finished watching it an hour ago for the show. So, you know, because 1960, whatever, it's black and white. Who wants to watch that? You know,
unless you're doing a John le Carre.
Right. Then you look at the list, you're like, well,
yeah,
I don't have to have seen every one of these to talk about them, but I clearly I have to see this one, his debut novel,
right?
A really major film in its day. Burton's perfect for it because of that. If you to put, I don't know who you to put. He's perfect for it in a lot of ways because he is this guy. He's even at as young age of 39, he's this washed up, has no liver. You know, he went into the doctor. This is a true story about Richard Burton. He went into the doctor when he was 40 something, and because he couldn't get up in the morning, and then it took him like half the day to just be able to move around normally. And so he went and had a look, and it turned out that his spine was crystallized with alcohol. That's what a drinker we're talking about.
Yeah.
And the character he plays is that guy too. It's part of why he's picked for this mission, because he's a high functioning alcoholic who spent the whole lifetime performing well, even though he's not been at full capacity. And that's what the mission is. It's to be in control of what you're saying at all times, to the point that your deliberate mistakes are believed. That's the key to the whole thing working. And like all good spy novels, nothing works the way it's supposed to, and everything's you have to adjust to on the fly. And was a tremendously moving film, beautiful black and white photography, and Claire Bloom too. My goodness, she's really good at it. And as with typical film properties today and back then, the guy was like, well, we got to get this guy. Yeah, we got our first choice, he's a star. And then it's like, now let's look at every available woman and put them all through the ringer, and so that we have 8 million options.
Yep.
Even when and Burton, who brought along a lot of his friends to be in it because he was a very powerful star at the time, didn't want Claire Bloom because she was an ex of his, and he was in a very volatile current relationship with who was essentially the love of his life, and just didn't want any of that stuff going on. In fact, he wanted Elizabeth Taylor to play them.
I was going to say, I would think that would be an issue Richard Burton probably ran into quite a bit, was, she's an ex of mine.
I'm sure more than the average Joe.
Yeah.
No question.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Anywho.
That's the behind the scenes drama. You know, he wanted Liz to play the role, and she's a good actor. She could have done it, but Claire Bloom is perfect for it.
Yeah.
Even John le Carré, who thought the casting of both of them was terrible, got a lesson in Hollywood that he ended up finding was very pleasant, which is just the collaborative nature of the thing. And the fact that these people aren't, you know, Richard Burton's not a Roman centurion. Yeah. That's not who you're getting. You're getting an actor who can do different things. And in this case, you're getting a guy who really, at least to some very key parts of this role, can relate directly to what it is, who this guy is, in a way that's going to read as honesty on the screen. Bloom is a little more actorly, but I've always liked her a lot. You know, Jay O'Sanders told that story about her over in Italy doing Daylight when she was older, which I thought was funny. You know, she's one of those actors who's got enough highlights that we think of her as a classic great actor, but she has, for every highlight, she has a movie she deeply regrets that she did. Yeah. And for every great movie she said yes to, she said she turned down 100 good movies. She's one of those people who just was like, no, you know.
Yeah.
So
for any number of reasons. Yeah. So
this is as good as I've ever seen her in anything, and she's really good. I just really loved her in it. So Spy Who Came in from the Cold is great. It's dark, rainy days in black and white and twinkling piano, and every once in a while a saxophone, and people are drinking and smoking and whispering at each other, and it's just moody and amazing.
It's kind of
really good film.
It's like spy noir a little bit,
which is what all these are to one degree or another.
Yeah, but this kind of was part of the introduction of that.
But it's such a lonely movie. She's such a lonely character. He's such a loner. You know, the guys who are helping him aren't his buddies and don't. You bring up can only afford to care about him to the degree that the mission works.
You bring up a great point.
And they engineered this one to where it can work even if he never comes back.
Yeah.
And that's all. And it's not sneaky. It's not like halfway through he finds out they never cared about me at all. This is their first conversation they have. This is all above board, and we all get what we're part of. It's you know, like I say, that kind of thing is old hat now. I think in '65 it kind of blew people's minds.
I'm sure it did. You bring up a key word that will come up several times throughout this. It's something to keep in mind as you watch all of these films. That, you know, I think one of the big things that le Carré is but what he shows you is the loneliness of this profession, where when you put your country and your duty for country above literally everything else, it's an incredibly lonely existence.
Well, that was his experience. He was who he was. What he was doing was a secret to everybody he was surrounded with all those years. He was doing this work. And so that isolation, it also gave him all of his free time. He was able to write novels.
I can't remember the name of the guy.
There were some benefits to that kind of.
Yeah, there was. In reading about le Carré, he was talking about. He had like a mentor who was also an MI. I think this one might have been still an MI5, but whatever. But he
also wrote
novels. Yeah, and
more old-fashioned potboiler type things, but still, that was his hobby, was writing novels.
It was like, you got to do something to fill your time. Might as well,
You're not going to be hanging out with your pals or any of that because you just.
And the movies that I've seen, and I will admit that I haven't seen all of these movies and series. I've seen a good number of them, but all of them always have a moment too where it's a wide shot and far, like in the distance is our hero, you know, whether it's Smiley or somebody else, and it's this, and there's nothing else around him. It is this moment of that dude is all alone. He has nobody. And it's a choice. It is a choice to be that way.
And the others where the outside element is somebody, you know, it really shows what a complication adding somebody to nobody is in this sort of world. And Spy Who Came In From the Cold is that part of it is a little bit the fantasy from the author's standpoint, but it just really makes the thing resonate and come home. Because I've said what a modern thing it was for 65, but it's still old-fashioned storytelling, you know, in that way. It can't be older because it's the start of the Cold War, basically, but it could be the black and white photography, all that, the process behind the people in a car is all very super old-fashioned, you know. It's definitely pre-Graduate, as we talk about in that way. But
all right, so next up we move all the way to 1979, and we do a mini series.
Yeah, he had a few adaptations came out after this, and he really started ramping up his novel writing. But there wasn't the very next movie adaptation of his didn't do super well, so they kind of were like, okay, well. Yeah. And it was a similar kind of story that didn't do well. So Hollywood decided, in a nutshell, well, this dude's stuff, like we've done our version of it, and now that it's over. And that happens to a lot of novelists. You know, Michael Connelly, how many novels has that guy written? Right. He's basically got one movie that's been adapted, and it did okay, but it didn't do great. And they decided, well, you're not a we're not going to do a series of this stuff unless it's gangbusters. Vince Flynn, you know, you just go down the list of all these guys who you read on the beach or women, you know, novelists, and they kind of get, if they're popular enough, they get their shot, you know. Right. Lincoln Child and Douglas Preston write nothing but big Michael Crichton, like Hollywood adventures, and they've only ever had one adapted. Yeah, because it wasn't great. That's it. That was your shot.
That was your shot.
That was kind of what happened to Le Carré. A little bit of what happened to him post The Spy Who Came In From the Cold.
But then I think it was and then you get the BBC says, well, let's take this Le Carré novel and we'll make it into a mini series where we can spend a little bit more time.
Well, because he wrote a novel that is essentially that requires very little, and this was necessary to the BBC. If you watch any old Doctor Who or whatever, you know, you can shoot on location out in Cornwall or what, you know, or you can go to Stonehenge, but you're not gonna be shooting in Shanghai. You know, it's not going to be that kind of thing if it's a BBC deal. Even I Claudius, right, is just sets, very theatrical like sets, and you may hear the roar of the Colosseum in the background, but we will not be going up the Vom out into the Colosseum where you can actually see any of that happening. It's all very enclosed, and you know, that's just how they
stay in the bowels of the Colosseum, or in an antechamber. If
Carré was kind enough to write a novel where that is essentially, there's a couple things that broaden the story, but it is mostly an insider guy playing an inside game, the coolest and deadliest of all. And they got the great, he's a little old even for a Le Carré, you know, hero Alec Guinness, but he's perfect. He is perfect for this role, and he was beloved by England. So, you know, it was a good role for him, even though he notoriously was insecure about the work that he was doing.
Right.
Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, the miniseries, they essentially were able to, because it was a miniseries, they were able to shoot all of it, you know, do it all. We talked about this back in the Jane Austen episode, which this episode is going to mirror a lot, even though it's completely different type of content. It's still an author's work that has similar themes going throughout them. You know, when they do a Jane Austen miniseries and they can spend 4 or 5 hours on it, you get all of it.
Yep.
You really get all the characters. You get the differentiations between them, how they're important, how they affect each other. You don't have to abbreviate or combine anything. And when you don't have to do that, you really feel like you got the full experience. And this delivered that. And this story, without going too much into it, is full of surprises and just really, really clever. It's about really, really smart people. It's an author who's so smart that he can write this story about really, really smart people outsmarting each other. And still the collateral damage that goes along with any sort of subterfuge, you know. But Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy really is a game. The metaphor for it, which is a time-old metaphor, is chess. And if you're really clever, you check out the shingle for this week's show, and it has a spoiler in it for Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. So
okay,
check it out. It's not such a spoiler that I am just like telling everybody everything. I wouldn't do that, but I found the piece of art very clever, and I find that story clever, and it was so popular that they did a sequel to it a few years later.
Yeah, the Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is we mentioned in The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. We mentioned
George Smiley.
George Smiley, who is and this is where George Smiley takes center stage. He's the main character in Tinker Tailor, and he's a recurring main character in this era of John le Carré novels. They because Tinker Tailor, the miniseries, was so popular, they wanted to do another, but they couldn't do the next one because, as I say, the next one took place in Hong Kong or someplace, Thailand, someplace where it was like, well, we can't do that one. So they just skipped to the next one, which also was primarily based in London and some places in Europe, called Smiley's People, which is also with Alec
really
Guinness and all the people
replaying his quote. Most of the same actors coming back to play the actors that made it through to that novel. One key exception, but it's really, really good. And at that point went from, hey, let's make a miniseries out of this. It won't cost much. We just need to get Gielgud or Richardson or somebody to do it, and it would be fine. This was highly anticipated because it was the sequel to an extremely popular miniseries. That was also popular in America because it's awesome, but it's not for American audiences the same way. The 1979 television, I mean, think about what that was: Fantasy Island, Love Boat, Dallas, Dukes of Hazzard, Charlie's Angels. It was escapist nonsense, basically wall-to-wall escapist nonsense. And this was just the opposite of that. It was this very somber and, very smart without being demonstratively satisfying story. And so, but it was a hit here, just like a lot of those English miniseries were just kind of by only a certain group of people. Sort of public television people. I call them Vikings cruise participants these days. That's who I tease them. That's a certain kind of person. I grew up next door to a couple like that, who would see the world in comfort and just were really smart and were not into any sort of conventional entertainment. They only liked these things that were that felt important and were they were television for people who don't own a television, put it that way.
Or the people that would have during the week would have the television covered by a shawl, and then they would take the shawl off.
They allow themselves a couple hours of television, and their watching of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy would represent something of a compromise in their artistic lives.
Yes, because because Hercule Poirot was not on that week.
Anyway. The point is, when Smiley's People came out, it was a big deal. It was a big deal. It was a sequel to a big hit that had grown only in esteem over those few years.
Tinker Tailor Soldier.
But it's an extremely complicated story, even compared to Tinker, which is very complicated. It's a really, really complicated plot. There was a English radio DJ who had a show every Monday after the Sunday airing of Smiley's People called does anyone know what happened? It was a call-in show for a couple hours about the previous night's episode, where
that's spectacular.
British people would call in and try and explain to him what was going on in the show, which of course many of them did a terrible job of, and that's ripe for comedy of all kinds. And Cornwell, being what he was, Le Carré, he thought that was really, really funny. Like he loved that. He thought that was great.
Oh my gosh.
What is going on? That's a good question.
Yeah. I mean, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, I mean, that story is loosely based on a real life thing that happened in England. And to him happened, and he was, sort of tangentially involved in those in this.
He's represented. I can't remember who did, because it's been a million years since I saw the '79 version, but his himself is represented in the 2011 version by Benedict Cumberbatch's character. Yeah. So check that out. And when you're watching it, realize to some degree the whole story is from that guy's point of view. And it gives it a different spin, I think.
And we'll get to that Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy in a bit. But so then you get Smiley's People, highly anticipated, that one. So Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is more about trying to rout out a mole in the
to
system.
Hunt out a spy amongst yourselves.
Spies, yeah. And then Smiley's People, different but very different but similar. Again, George Smiley, like he was in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, is brought out of retirement, and he when one of his former assets and Emerge General is found murdered and tidying up loose ends for the circus, and the circus is this
what they call their offices and their their headquarters or whatever.
And its former employers. He discovers a clandestine operation run by his nemesis Carla for his own personal benefit, and so and then
Carla and Smiley are the queens on the chess set.
Yep.
And it's important to understand about Smiley too. He's this understated, very English, easy guy to root for, because he's always hunting ostensibly the bad guy. But he's the guy back in Spy Who Came In From the Cold. He's a very minor character in that, but he's the guy where they essentially promise the only condition Burton has his character for going on this dangerous mission is leave the girl out of it. Leave her out of it. I don't even want anybody to know she exists. And both of them are all, oh yes, absolutely. And it's Smiley, when things aren't working out, that brings the girl into it. That is a really ruthless, and at the time turns out to be a very damaging thing. But it's also the key to the mission working. Doesn't work right. It's like an A-team plan. It doesn't work right. It just works. But at what cost? You have to ask yourself that. Yeah. So he's the inside operative ever. Like in all of literature, he's the guy who. Yeah. Joel brought up a different guy, the CIA equivalent of this guy, which is played brilliantly by Matt Damon and Robert De Niro's Good Shepherd.
Good Shepherd.
Which is truly a true story, a biography. It's a kind of longer film with a bigger scope, but same thing. A behind the scenes guy who he doesn't go to Paris and drink martinis and have sex with models. It never goes anywhere. He just reads the reports and figures everything out. Every once in a while, he maybe interviews somebody or interrogates somebody, if you will, but he just stays in his office and fights the Cold War better than anybody else alive.
Yep, and makes the insanely hard decision when the insanely hard decision needs to be made.
Has to be made, and that's what Smiley is. He's a fascinating character and an amazing
and lets
character.
Other people take the glory. lets other people.
That part's not important to him.
No, yeah.
He's also these books of his started getting stagnant in a way because of Smiley. Now, they're great books, but he became Le Carré's sort of Bond stand-in, and what was needed for his novels to evolve to some degree was a genius thing that I think happened in our next film. Right? What's our next movie?
Yeah, Little Drummer Girl.
Right. It starts there and continues, where Little Drummer Girl is just about an actress who's good at lying that is recruited by the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, to out a bunch of terrorists. Mm-hmm. But she's not a spy. She's not a deep thinker. She's an actor. And which is the job of a spy, maybe as much or more than anything. But that film was made by George Roy Hill and stars Diane Keaton, and it has a bit of a light touch for my tastes.
Sure.
Those are both people that I like a lot. Keaton, is good in it. And George Roy Hill, I think, is a fantastic actor. He made Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Sting and stuff like that. That's his forte. But he's not one to really revel in the dark shadows. He's just not that kind of storyteller.
This is a Sting kind of George Le Carré adaptation.
Exactly. Even though the novel really isn't that at all. The novel really is the story of a relative innocent caught up in the dark, awful games of the intelligence agencies of the day. And we'll talk a little bit more about Little Drummer Girl in a bit too, because there's another adaptation of that coming up around the corner. I think a more faithful one. But that change, the outsider, the really intelligent, adaptive outsider being brought into this world, that's a step of much further sophistication on behalf of Le Carré's writing. He's no longer quite writing what he knows. He's getting bold enough to create these people now that are somewhere outside of his experience and still have them ring true on the page and therefore on the screen. So
he can he can ask the question. He's comfortable enough to ask the question, well, what would happen if someone who had no idea what was going on came into this world? And how and to go, okay, how would they logically react? How would they emotionally react? And then how would that screw up?
What is different about them that would make their decisions a raw and unpredictable element in these typical stories? Whereas with Smiley, you don't know how he's going to get there because you're baffled the whole time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you literally need him to explain it to you at the end. It's it's very heightened and very intelligent, but it's almost Agatha Christie-like in that way. Whereas now suddenly it's different. You really don't know. His characters don't know. He, to some degree, as an author, feels like he doesn't really know. And therefore there's very much a, wow, it adds a lot of tension to the storytelling. I really, really dig it.
And so
it becomes the norm, not completely, but it more or less becomes the norm from here on out in his stories.
Right, because the next one movie we're going to talk about, The Russia House, is the same sort of thing where you get is he a bookseller? He's
a bookseller. He sells it's not Penguin Classics, but he basically sells the classics to different bookstores throughout Europe. His publishing firm publishes classic literature and essentially public domain literature in these finely bound editions for people who really like books. And he's a reader and he's a writer himself. And he's in a big way, he's into Tolstoy and the big Russian epics and Russian culture. And he goes on these visits to Moscow in ways that, and other Russian places in ways that other Westerners don't, because all he's doing is selling books. And the Russians love him because he's very well read and really understands Russian literature and Russian culture in a way other people don't. And it in the film played by Sean Connery in one of his very, very best screen roles. Perhaps not his most celebrated, but
Yeah, it's great, and it's also great to see the guy who made Bond play this total other, this is opposite
play
Bond.
this outside element guy who has no business spying or anything. It's a fantastic performance by him. As a matter of fact, I feel like of a lot of his performances, this guy is the closest to Sean Connery that we probably have on screen. Like, this really feels like a very close cousin of his. He goes to this retreat, and there's this mysterious guy there played by Klaus Maria Brandauer, a former Bond villain. They were in Never Say Never Again together.
Oh, right.
They played that stupid holographic video game against each other, if you guys remember that.
Yeah.
Also, Maria Brandauer was replaced by Sean Connery at the last second in Hunt for Red October.
Oh, get out. Oh, I didn't know
it was supposed to be Harrison Ford and Klaus Maria Brandauer, which would have worked because the bigger star was the hero, and then the submarine guy could be a different sort of character actor. When they went with the young Alec Baldwin, they felt they had to up the sub-captain to a bigger star, and Connery agreed to do it. And the rest is history.
Sure.
So there's some connections between these guys, but the fact that they've been in a movie together actually helps, because there's a real chemistry and connection with them in these only couple of sort of philosophical discussions they have to have together. So it's just a guy. He's just a guy.
And he happens to know a lot about Russia and Russian
and a
culture.
guy who and he just happens to bump into a guy who literally knows enough to change the world. I don't think it's overselling it to say that that's what's at stake. And that guy trusts him and brings him into this web of intrigue where suddenly the CIA, led by great Roy Scheider, and the MI6 with the awesome Edward Fox, also in Never Say Never Again.
James Fox.
Sorry, is it James Fox?
James Fox.
Oh, sorry. Edward Fox was the guy in Never Say Never Again. So this is his brother.
Right.
No offense to these guys, because they're different. They're brothers, but they do play the same type of guy pretty much movie in and movie out. Ed is a little bit more, I think, comedically buoyant than James. James got a little bit more intensity, but they're really similar on screen. So sorry. And their kid, Lawrence Fox, is really an awesome actor too. I don't remember. One of them's their uncle. One of them's his dad. Like I said, I get them mixed up. I can't tell you, but that's not important right now. What's important is that there's also a great cameo kind of by filmmaker Ken Russell, who's ridiculously over the top and fun in it. Didn't know because didn't want to know is one of his lines, and it's just fantastic. Everything that comes out of his mouth is a quotable, fun, cartoonish thing. It's very enjoyable. Not every character can be like that, only this little character, but it's great. But what happens is this friend of Brandauer's character, her, played by Michelle Pfeiffer in this case, her whole family gets caught up in this thing. And she's an innocent person that our hero feels he has to protect. And nobody involved in this, in ways we've seen up till this point in all of these novels, nobody is on her side. Nobody cares what happens to her. They don't care at all. They don't come out and say that, but they would sacrifice 100 of her to get this information. And our hero is aware of that. And the whole thing is his, with all these super spies involved, it's his juggling act of trying to do what he agrees is maybe an important thing for the West, but to try and protect himself for sure. And this younger woman that he ends up sort of falling in love with. Pfeiffer's great in it. I already said so Connery's fantastic in it. It's packed to the rafters with great character actors.
Oh, it's so good. Roy Scheider, John Mahoney. I think J.T. Walsh is in this. Just all sorts of just great.
Really, really, really good cast and a really smart film. And Fred Schapisi, the director of it, he's a little like George Roy Hill. He doesn't take the foot off the gas quite the way Hill did in the first version of Little Drummer Girl, but he keeps things. It's like there's saxophone, but it's Branford Marsalis or whatever, so it's kind of jazzy and okay.
Yeah,
there's this sense that there's a bit of a comedy of errors nature to this story, and he brings all that out without losing much of the inherent tension involved. It's a really good movie from 1990. If you want to go back and check it out, if you haven't seen it,
it works.
Or if you saw it when you were a kid and thought it was kind of dull, as an adult, I can tell you it's a whole different film. It's really different. As you mature, the mature storytelling in that goes a lot longer.
Yeah, I think it's probably I think I probably.
Because it was one of those movies where I thought
7 years ago. Yeah,
I saw Hunt for Red October, and then I saw this on video as this next film. It was about Russia and stuff. I mean, I expected a spy movie, and I didn't know what I watched. I didn't hate it, but it stuck with me. And then as I've seen it a few times throughout the years, it's a winner. It gets kind of better every time. So that's a good film.
So following in the footsteps of another Bond, jumping into a Le Carre sort of anti-Bond.
Indeed.
Part.
The anti-Bond.
Yeah.
Or really is it? We'll talk about that.
Yeah. Pierce Brosnan, who was still Bond at the time. I think he still had one more Bond movie, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
If I got my dates right. But yeah, Pierce Brosnan is the main
Pierce
guy.
Brosnan literally plays a Playboy super spy in it.
Yep.
But because the story is not from Pierce Brosnan's perspective, it's from Jeffrey Rush's who plays the titular Taylor of Panama.
Of Panama, yeah.
The Brosnan character comes off like a complete dick, and Brosnan is smart storyteller, and he knows this, and he plays his Bond persona. He sort of plays up where you think this guy's going to do something heroic at some point, and he just continually is awful and does everything that's really bad. Without spoiling everything, that's what's happening. The super spy in question is.
Yeah, he's banished to Panama City.
If that were a real type of guy in real life, and you were just the schlub who had some inside information that he needed, this is how it would go. The reversal is that you're following the schlub's perspective throughout the entire movie. It's a really great performance. It's fantastic by Brosnan because it's a loaded gun of a role for him. It's just, here you go. Fire off one of these every 15 minutes and you're going to be totally memorable and awesome. And he's awesome in it. But it's Jeffrey Rush who's also kind of a I think rather broad performer, really has to take it down a few notches for this film to work. And he does very admirably. He definitely plays a twitchy, eccentric guy, which you would expect from Jeffrey being cast. But it's a soft and quiet observer to this world of spies. The plot is complicated, and I've seen this movie 4 times and I still couldn't really tell you. It all has to do with the transfer of the canal and I don't know.
Canal, and the trying to make sure
which is a time that is rife for it's a time that is rife for chaos and in this case thievery.
It's kind of a Casablanca sort of environment, but where there's like this thing in the New York Times that I thought is it's a Casablanca with no heroes. The area that part of Panama,
right. Really, but it shows you it really, more than any of these, this is the film that takes on the Bond films directly. And as much as he can, it's still very much a Le Carre novel, but because a Bond type guy is not our hero in this. The closest to that really you get ever is The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. That's the guy, the hardened spy master, behind the scenes guy, and he's as close as it comes. And after that, he's really not interested in that guy anymore. But when that same dude shows up in this film, he I don't know that he's the villain per se, but he's he's the guy causing all the trouble for our hero, and that's a fun reversal, and it's a pretty fun movie. It's all the glamour from a Bond movie, except when you really see it for what it is, it's not glamorous. It's degradation, and it's kind of messy and ugly and awful.
Yeah,
and that works great in that film. And the film is equally really, really good. So, Panama is an exotic place that's not in a lot of films, and it comes vividly to life in that movie too, which is fun.
Right. All right. So next up is I think it's either my favorite or my second favorite Le Carre adaptation, and that's The Constant Gardener. I love Rachel Weisz. I love her with The Passion of a Burning Sun.
She won the Oscar for her role in this, and she is, again, not the villain, but she is the catalyst with which our hero is essentially tortured and brought through all the paces he's brought through. She's the element that's introduced into the story that causes him all sorts of trouble.
This one's interesting because it's the story is about what first, quote unquote, first world countries, how they test things out on third world countries before they get them available to their own citizens. And that's what happens with this movie,
so it's very much about Western Europe, England, and in this case Africa, which is obviously a very volatile place. It's got conflict diamonds wrapped up into it, and it's got a very typical Le Carre plot that, again, we're not really going to go into blow by blow. But the point is, the fella, again, he's the titular character, just like the Tailor of Panama. The Constant Gardener is played by Ralph Fiennes, beautifully played by Ralph Fiennes. Because this amongst all these guys, Connery's character, Rush's, this guy's the ultimate refinement of the not a heroic guy. This is just a guy. He's very clever and smart, but he's just a guy who likes quietly working in his garden. You know what I mean? Who falls in love with this activist who brings him into this world, unbeknownst to her even, of rather high intrigue, or like Joel really said, this sort of dark guinea pig experiment that he becomes wrapped up in. And his decisions are based on the things that these spies aren't. And that Le Carre really is saying something, because you're going to hear this again and again and again. This is a person who's not part of this, and what they do and why they do it is totally different. It's not like they're trying to ruin the plot of the spies, on the side of the West or whatever, but he just can't be relied on to do things out of duty purely because he's got all these other things going on. I mean, in this case, this guy's madly in love with this woman, and what he's doing to protect, what he's willing to do to protect her, and ultimately what he's willing to do to protect what she was doing is amazing. And how a guy of his limited action hero ability is able to do it is also amazing. It's a really, really cool story. I agree. Really well told for the screen, to the point that, unlike some of these, which were all kind of, it was pretty good, but it wasn't very exciting, or it wasn't this or that. They're all kind of like that to conventional audiences at the time, but this story at least got some recognition for Rachel. It's kind of a weird performance because she's fantastic in it, but I don't know that it's not a best supporting actor win like we like to see for men, where they show up and just explode onto the screen.
Down,
yeah. She actually is. It's also kind of she's more quirky and a much bigger screen presence than Fiennes is, but she's still a very, very real, believably sort of damaged and human element in the story, and that's really, really well. It's really well done by her, so I like that.
Yeah, it's great.
That's a compliment, not a diss. But usually it's like, well, which girl who played a sassy hooker is going to win best supporting actress this year?
The hooker with a heart of gold.
Or we really had, I don't know how many of those win in a row there for a while, and that's what constituted a great female performance was, no offense, but was Whoopi Goldberg in Ghost, not Rachel Weisz in The Constant Gardener. So that it represents an evolution of thinking too that I think is really, really positive.
Yeah. So next up, we're gonna leap forward in time a bit to talk about another series.
But this era, that's pretty great, isn't it? Those handful of films.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Well, and that's a good point. There's, it kind of after after Spy Who Came in from the Cold, we get there's a sort of a break. As you said, there were some other adaptations that didn't do well, and then there's sort of a glut or a flood of Le Carre adaptations, and then there's a little bit of a break between like Russia House and Taylor of Panama, and then we get another little, we get Taylor of Panama and Constant Gardener pretty much one on top of each other, and then there's another little break here, and then we get a movie that we're going to talk about later, but then we get The Night Manager, a British miniseries with
back to miniseries. That's deliberate. Back to a more simply told story. This one's a little globe-trotting, but it's not. Nobody's hanging off the edge of bridges or duking it out on trains or anything like that. They're moving around all these different locations. But this film was literally like, you couldn't make this movie today.
Right.
It's a shame because of the Brexit makes this kind of thing kind of impossible. Whereas when they were making it, it was kind of all one country, and you could move around, and you could have in a TV miniseries, you could have 5 different exotic European locations. Very, very cool. Starring Tom Hiddleston.
Yep.
As the titular night manager.
Yep.
I like saying that. As the titular character.
The
night manager.
Yep. And Hugh Laurie.
Hugh Laurie, brilliant in it, as who we're gonna kind of call the villain. But that's never really clear in these stories.
This one,
read the synopsis for this so they can have a sense of what it is. But.
Great little like 2-sentence blurb here. Jonathan Pine, night manager of a luxury hotel in Cairo and former British soldier, is recruited by Angela Burr, the manager of a Foreign and Commonwealth Office task force investigating illegal arms sales, to infiltrate the inner circle of an arms dealer, Richard Roper. And that's
so a guy with all the tools to be a spy, recruited to be a spy, but still somewhat of an outsider to the situation. Who plays Angela Burr in it? She's great too.
It is Olivia Colman.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so let's just not leave her off the table. She's very popular these days. So that's what you're talking about: Hugh Laurie, Tom Hiddleston, and Olivia Colman. So if you haven't seen this, that ought to do it. That really should do it for you. Loki's in it. Watch it.
House is in it.
You know what I mean? Watch
the Queen
it. Seriously.
is in it. Yeah.
The Queen is in it. It's really, really good. It's really, really good miniseries.
Yeah.
It's based on a really clever novel.
Yeah.
Where if you've been watching up to this point, because I think if you watch carefully, Russia House doesn't quite prepare you for Taylor of Panama, but Taylor of Panama pretty much telegraphs what's going to happen in Constant Gardener. Like there's this sort of, some of these books, believe it or not, we're not getting into endings or twists, and we're not going to start now, but some of these have a happy ending. They do.
Yeah.
Some of them do not. Perhaps even the majority, a solid majority, do not. But you don't know. He's got enough happy endings littered throughout here that you might get one, and you really, really want one every time. And it's really that more than what it actually ends up being that's important. It's your wanting to root for things to work out desperately. That is needed to get you from A to Z in these stories. And this one works on you slowly. You know who the hero is because he's the big movie star. He's the good looking movie star. He's not hard to spot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like you get what's going on. So, but this is a slow burn of a thing. It really is a novel for the television, but those are working out everywhere you look, on Netflix and stuff, these limited series and stuff.
Yeah.
It's just so good. And again, it revitalized, to a lesser degree, the movie we skipped did this too. We're kind of saving that for the end because to me it's signature, as I say. But Night Manager showed that there's a whole audience for this type of thing, and that Le Carré really sings in this format. That was the lesson we learned all the way back in 1979. You know what I mean? But they learned it again as viewing audiences have become more sophisticated due to streaming limited series with beginnings, middles, and ends. And it's ultimate. It's as good a thing as is on this list. So we highly, and it's new, 2016. Go get it. Go get it. It's good.
And then a couple years later, we get a remake of the
got the band back together again. All the same people who made Night Manager got back together again to
make a remake of Little Drummer Girl.
Right, which is not a remake of Little Drummer Girl, obviously, but a new, rather proper adaptation of it.
Right.
Little Drummer Girl's tougher story by far. It is tougher than The Night Manager. It just is. That story has abuse and there's things in it that are pretty ugly. But Little Drummer Girl really is. It's weird. It's not this, but it has the effect of watching a hostage turn over to the side of the people who are kidnapping and abusing her.
Right.
That's just a difficult subject to tackle. And that's kind of what it is. That's the beauty of it. You really don't know whether her inoculation is fake or real. That's the whole point of the character being an actor, and being a liar. You just don't know ever until you do. And there's lots of tension in that. And great. Who's the woman who plays her in this?
Florence Pugh.
So fantastic, complicated younger actor who played a role that's worthy of her sort of her mystery and her duplicity.
Yeah, again, a great triumvirate of people anchoring this film with Michael Shannon and Alexander Skarsgård.
As the two angels and demon, if you will, which is what you'll have to decide on her shoulder. It's great, but it isn't. It gets a hit, I think, in the reaction department, in that it is not the crowd pleasing.
Right.
You know what I mean? The thing that Night Manager is. It just isn't that. There's not a nice, clean domino effect to an ending. It is just far more complicated than that. It's an older story from a different era, from when he was writing in a slightly different way. And that it's great though. It's so good. It's so good.
Yeah.
But it is different.
And then we move on. So actually a couple years before Night Manager, these next two films I actually, for some reason, have not seen, even though.
Holy cow. I put them together because this was kind of made by the same people, these two movies.
Yeah.
And
so it's, I don't know why I haven't seen these, but I didn't see them.
If you're into Le Carré and you haven't seen them, then you don't feel bad. Feel excited.
Yeah.
And get to watch them. They're awesome.
Yeah. And these casts that we're about to talk about are pretty bonkers. It's got great pedigree. In 2014, we have A Most Wanted Man with Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Kind of the final starring role of Philip Seymour Hoffman. That film, if it has any fame or notoriety, is that. Technically, the last movie he worked on was the final
Mission Impossible
Katniss movie or whatever. But
the Hunger Games thing.
He didn't quite finish that one.
Yes.
But this was his final released film with him in a major role. So. And it's A Most Wanted Man. It's about this is a throwback story, which is great. Or maybe it's an old book. I don't think it is actually, but it feels like an older book. No, it can't be an older book because it's all about post 9/11 terrorism and stuff. It's about this old school German operative, Gunther or something.
I just was looking at it and then I switched.
Played by Philip Seymour Hoffman. Yeah. It's a German, European.
Gunther Bachmann.
It's an English film with using almost entirely German and ethnic cast. It has 2 Hollywood ringers in it, though. The first of which, obviously, is the star Philip Seymour Hoffman. This is in order to get it watched by more than just Germans.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a little handful of American ringers with Rachel McAdams.
Yeah, but only 2 that are playing Germans.
Oh, sure. I see what you're saying. Yeah. Rachel McAdams.
Right. There's actually American characters in it, played by Americans. Robin Wright is at the top of that list.
And Willem Dafoe.
Willem Dafoe plays a German too.
Yeah.
So, and I think most significantly, my favorite actor of her generation, I'm not going to remember her name. She's awesome. Rachel McAdams. I remember. Yeah. You didn't have to tell me, Joel. Are you proud of me?
Yes, of course I am. I'm always proud of you, though.
Thank you. Anyway, Rachel McAdams is a lawyer who gets wrapped up in this thing that involves high finance, banking, and terrorism, and all kinds of craziness. And these 2 characters from 2 old school characters, 2 holdovers from the Cold War, one played by Philip Seymour Hoffman, the other played by Robin Wright, are doing this joint thing to get this information from this guy and to expose this terrorist ring.
Yeah.
And it's about all the ways that you do that and all the ways that people are affected and harmed by that. I think McAdams has the toughest role in it because she both plays sort of a prisoner. She's sort of a person who's brought into this sort of unwillingly, but she's different in that she brings herself into it on purpose in the first place. So Hoffman wisely, and it's this great exchange, and I don't think it's spoiling too much to say this, so I will, but he just says, when we picked you up and put that hood over your head and threw you into the back of that van, they said that you kind of kicked and screamed, but that you kind of let them do it. They've done this a few times, and I'm not doing a German accent when I'm saying this. It's very charming when Philip Seymour Hoffman says it, and oddly enough, this conversation puts you at ease when he says it. But he says, I think you're here because you wanted somebody to take this over for you.
Right.
That's why I think you're here, and we're the ones that can do it. That's how you should view the situation.
Yeah, I like this. I mean, this one little line from a New York Times article. It talks about kind of the whole movie. It kind of hinges on his mission is to make the world a safer place, but he worries that he's doing more harm than good. In doing what he's supposed to be doing, he doesn't know that he might be causing deeper harm, and that sort of.
There's very much a crisis of conscience at the center of that character for that reason. Yeah. And his bond with this American section chief, they have, and the fact that it's a man and a woman, I mean, that affects it in a different way. It's interesting. Robin Wright is fantastic in it. I tell you my favorite joke about it, but it spoils it, so I won't do that. So but A Most Wanted Man is a very, very worthy old school type of Jean le Carré story, because the heroes, the people we're privy to, really are these insider people, which we haven't seen that in a while, and who that guy is, who that German guy is, and Cornwell knows a lot about Germans and the culture, the philosophy of these people. And this guy, I have no doubt, is based on a guy that he probably knew. But it's in this modern, really ugly, complicated anti-terrorist setting. And who we are in that setting is different than who we are in a Cold War setting. It's just it requires you to be different and act differently. And it's messier and kind of awful. So this is a really good film.
All right, and then next up is Our Kind of Traitor. Kind of another awesome cast: Ewan McGregor, Naomi Harris, Stellan Skarsgård, Damian Lewis. Again, this is a movie that
Ewan McGregor is a professor, and Naomi Harris, his wife, is a barrister, and they're on holiday someplace in Europe. I don't know that it's super important. It's someplace exotic anyway. And they bump into, at the restaurant, they bump into all these Russian mobsters having this big party. And they're having marital problems, which are, we haven't talked much about it, but which are definitely a central theme of the married people in John Le Carre's novels. Joel got it out in his quote. So a lot of them aren't married. They're true loners. That's really more the norm. But when you bump into one, usually they have some marital problems, and usually it's the guy's fault. So I don't know what that means in his books thematically, but and they're having this makeup vacation. They're trying to make their marriage work despite some goofiness that he's committed against their fidelity, and it's kind of working, but it's kind of that pain from those sorts of things linger, and the bitterness comes out. It just has to come out, and that has to kind of run its course. And to a certain degree, that has to never end. If you've ever jilted somebody, it's your job, if you want to make it work, to tolerate that every time it happens. But it's painful to do that because you feel like you're never forgiven. And if you're a person who's been through that, on the other side of that, you can't help but do that even after you've forgiven somebody and moved on. It comes out, that negative, whatever it is, it can build up in you years and years, and then it comes out. So that's what makes it hard. And that's what makes it kind of a miracle. And you're really rooting for these two characters. These are great actors who play very likable people. Yeah. You want them to work it out. You're glad they're trying to work it out. You get what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But that's a little different for them. And this is a lot like the Russia House, where Skarsgård plays this guy who has been around the block and has a lot of stuff that could be useful to intelligence agencies, as as long as the intelligence agencies are really fighting the good fight against dirty money in Europe. And the question becomes, are we really? Who's getting rich from all this Russian oligarchy and crime money, of which there are trillions? Who's getting rich? Mm-hmm. Who's getting rich off of that? That's just a really valid question. The movie asks it. We've been asking it for the last few years in a way that we weren't previously, when this film came out, for example, because that money is a powerful thing in the world. Money is as powerful a thing as there is in the world. Yeah, love is powerful, but money
money makes the world go round.
Money is the thing that fuels the world machine. Mm-hmm. In a way love, I'm sorry, just doesn't. So who's on whose side in that situation? That's a great question. That's more of a Constant Gardner question. Yeah. It's a really neat mix of all those things. Obviously, Skarsgård is good. All the people who play his sort of immediate family is good. The guys who play the mobsters are terrifying. But it really is about it. Who's the guy? I mean, Ewan McGregor asks him later in the movie, "Why did you reach out to us?" He goes, "Well, because you were the only other person in the restaurant that night." Yeah. And that's not the total answer, but that's where it starts. That's really is. Yeah. You were it. I mean, you were the guy I met that I could ask this of, and I didn't know if it would work. When who's the redheaded guy? You just said his name.
Damian Lewis. Yeah.
He's the intelligence officer who takes on this case. Damian Lewis says, he says to him, "Why did he pick you?" It's all this, whatever. And Ewan's like, "I don't know. I think he was punting."
Yeah, frankly,
how an average person gets wrapped up in a thing.
It makes me think of The Man with One Red Shoe, the kind of the comedy, the 80s comedy with Tom Hanks, where it's just like, this spy needed to throw people off his scent, and he just sees a guy walking through the airport with one red tennis shoe on, and just names him. And all of a sudden,
instead of the nun with the shades, he chooses the man with one red shoe, and it just becomes a one of those farces where something almost happens like 40 times until it actually happens. Yep. So fans of Big Business will really, really dig Man with One Red Shoe. Yeah. Check that out. That's a pretty fun movie, I have to say.
It's a silly
with a fantastic Dabney Coleman performance.
Yeah.
Really good. I mean, Dabney's always he's money, but every once in a while he's able to go to the dark side. It's the edge. He plays guys like the guys he plays in War Games or whatever that makes him great. But every once in a while they just let him just go be the bad guy, dude. He's so great when he does. That's fun. That's a comedy, but that's a pretty clever. It's Le Carré-esque in a way, and that the dude is just a guy who, because something was noticed about him that was sort of different. Gets wrapped up in this crazy espionage thing.
And you can, we've seen, there's been a few even modern sort of comedies that have sort of taken that approach too.
But none lately that are bold enough to not have a jibber jabbery talky.
Well, I didn't say they were good comedies. I didn't say they were good comedies. I just said that they were.
Tom Hanks in Man with One Red Shoe just plays a concert violinist. I want to say
the violinist.
Coming back from Russia because there's some culture exchange business, but he plays he gets to go a little crazy at the end when the world really gets crazy around him from a comedy standpoint, but he mostly is just a guy in it. That's part of the joy of it, is that he gets that he's just a guy, and he's not, when the hot chick spy played by Laurie Singer starts coming on to him and stuff, he can't believe it's happening to him. He doesn't have a comeback line for everything that happens in the movie. Most of it, he's like, what? Until finally there's so many was, and they're getting so much bigger and bigger that he can't deny them anymore. That's a fun film. That's a good pull, because I don't know when we'd ever talk about that, and I actually like that movie a lot.
That's one of those movies that I watched like if I was ever homesick. That was one of my go-to films.
Basic cable film for sure from that era.
All right, so our final film that we're going to talk about is the film remake of the mini series of the limited series back in '79.
And again, it's not a film remake; it's another adaptation of the source material.
But it's taking
none of these are remakes.
So it's taking that story that was done in several episodes in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy
back in '79 and turning it into a mean 157 film, and
with, again, just an absolute bonkers cast.
Well, this truly, and this story needs this, and this miniseries had it too. It had the '79 miniseries version of it. But these parts played by these people at the top of their game at this time is and the beautiful cinematography, the incredibly gorgeous music, everything about this production is near perfect. If you watch only one John le Carré adaptation, and if you've never seen any from this list, and you don't like black and white 60s noir, this is the one to watch. This is the one to watch. It is nearly perfect an adaptation.
Anchored by Gary Oldman
as our good pal George Smiley.
As George Smiley.
Great role for him.
Benedict Cumberbatch, Colin Firth, Tom Hardy,
Toby Jones,
Kieran Hines, John Hurt, Toby Jones, Mark Strong. It's got
my favorite Mark Strong performance in it.
It's such a good Mark Strong. It's
really good.
This is the one where I was like, I like him. I'm like, oh, that's that guy from Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. I like him.
We're supposed to hate him in most of his movies, although he does a TV series too where he's really rather likable guy. But he doesn't get to play the likable guy much. He really does play the bad guy a lot. And this guy isn't necessarily a good guy in a conventional sense. It's a guy who's he really brings out the humanity of him in a short amount of time, and it makes the film doesn't have time to do that with any of these people, and the way it does it is so strong. It really gets to the heart of what that story is in such a quick way, while still feeling like you've been down the rabbit hole with these people. It's full and satisfying too. I don't think it will feel particularly fast paced for most modern movie watchers, but just to know the earlier miniseries, I've never read the book, but to know the earlier miniseries and to know how these reveals and things are sort of paced out, and to watch that same story kind of jump all over in time and all over, and to have it still kind of pay off in the end. This film needs your attention. You won't get everything unless you're quite a bit smarter than me or have read it, but you get it enough by the time it's over that it really makes everything that comes before sing in a glorious way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of glibly say this. I try not to say it much anymore, but in the early days of this podcast, I would say it way too much. There's not a wasted frame of film on this in this film. Every single moment is in there, very intentionally put.
No, I agree.
It means something that there is. So even if it's a moment where you like, where you know it like the Benedict Cumberbatch in the library, when he's that moment that like there's not a single moment that isn't intentional and meant to
that doesn't have some meaning.
That's and even
or
if
that isn't part of some small piece of the overall puzzle that helps the whole thing feel complete and helps you the viewer feel more enriched by it. Without going into the details, I don't think there's any point. We sort of talked a little bit about what the plot was about back when we talked about the miniseries, but I will bring up one thing that it does that I think is maybe the most. It does a lot of things that are really genius, but the one thing that I think is the most genius about it is there's this. And I think we see it about 3 different times throughout the film. But I think in the timeline of the film, it's the oldest thing we see. There's a office Christmas party at the circus.
The circus, again, being the government agency. That's what they call that.
It's just a Christmas party.
Yeah.
It really isn't anything more than that. And that alone is what's special and interesting about it. And our viewing different bits and pieces of it or different details from it, the more we learn about the people that we know throughout the story, it's an incredible artistic choice that I just bow in awe to because it's purely, there's some dialogue in it, but that part of the film is pure cinema. It's pure visual storytelling, and the character and visual storytelling usually is like, you know, how Tom Hardy gets from one end of a caravan in the desert in Mad Max Fury Road. That's visual storytelling too. It's delightful. But this is character stuff that's really hard to pull off without talking, or it's really easy to pull off without talking as long as you put it in the proper context. It just sort of blows my mind. It's such a good movie. Who directed that? We should tell them a few of the people in it.
That one is Thomas Alfredson.
Yeah, Alfredson directed it. Van Hoytma shot it. And the melancholy, again, the very rainy piano and saxophone music, same as and these stories take place at the same time, mid-60s, as The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. The score, who did that?
Alberto Iglesias.
Just outstanding support work from those from the designers involved. The design of the circuses, every shot in it, there's something interesting to point the camera at. It's so awesome. The very lived-in quality of the 60s at different parts of Europe that you visit. The compare and contrast between Strong's character and like Hardy's character and what they're going through. And, you know, Hardy, it is a great example. He feels like a guy who's in a different Jean Le Carré novel over here that just intersects with us for a brief period of time in this story, but he feels that fully realized, like his whole journey is his own. It's really, really good.
Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is a
film you have to be patient with, and you really have to pay close attention to. It's not, but it's so good. It's
once you see it, it's the kind of film that you're going to be you're like, I just saw Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and you're going to want to talk about it. You're going to want to, I dig that movie a lot. A lot.
That's why we saved it for last. So this would sort of feel like a countdown.
Yep. So that's number 1 on our countdown, I guess, sort of. I'm going to talk really high about it.
Hey, we just gave you a hodgepodge of stuff, a long, 12-piece menu of things you get to choose from. We suggest you try it all, but In this case, we really suggest you try it all. It's because same with Jane Austen. You know, it's like this. What we think this is better than that or whatever. But there's nothing here we really don't like. Even the worst of this stuff is rewarding in its own way. That's what's special about Le Carré. That his adaptations, which are not terribly cinematic in a thriller sense, still always work wonderfully because of the depth of storytelling that it starts with. And any attempt to bring that to life on screen, any honest attempt to do it, has worked out in something at least interesting, if not tremendously involving.
Yeah. I agree. I think that's a great place to leave it.
Cool.
So, all right, folks. Thank you again so much for listening to this episode of the Movie Show with Joe and Ryan. Please reach out to us if you have your own thoughts on John Le Carré.
Anything we missed? There are a few things we didn't talk about.
Anything we missed? Anything that, like, because we didn't talk about novel versus movie, is there anything that any
movies that he got wrong? Because I haven't read any of these novels.
Yeah. Is there something like, oh my God, they're
challenging movies to watch. There actually can be very challenging novels to read, even though they're written for all of us. You know, it's
there's a reason why these novels are popular. They're really good. They're really entertaining.
They're really good.
But, so reach out to us at the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan page on Facebook, at Ask Joel and Ryan on Twitter and Instagram, Ask Joel and Ryan at gmail.com. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can like and subscribe, leave us a comment below. We will.
Yeah, please subscribe. And you guys, I hate to say this. I hate to leave on a bum note. Why aren't you liking stuff? Seriously. That's not hard.
I mean, it's not hard. Like us. We're good people.
If you see us come across your feed, you don't have to wait to watch the show to put like on Facebook. Think of the things that you like on Facebook. Really think about it for a second. Help us out. This is the only thing that gets us in front of new faces is you guys spreading us about. And the easiest way for you to do it is to just click like. And I really think that if you can say in your heart that you like us at all, you'll start clicking, and you'll do it now, and you really do it from now on.
Yep, click. I mean, this logo alone, alone is worth a like.
It is.
Go ahead.
We need it.
Like.
We need it to continue. So I just wanted to throw that little guilt trip in at the end.
But we love you. This isn't meant to. So thank you so much for those of you who did listen all the way through.
We do appreciate
it. And we will see you next time on the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan.
And who knows what that show will be about? It's a mystery.
This week we do not know.
All the way to the end.
Thank you for listening to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. Remember, all views and opinions represented in this podcast are personal and belong solely to the speaker and do not represent those people, institutions, or organizations that the speaker may or may not be associated with, unless explicitly stated. None of these views and opinions were intended to malign or deceive. And now, here's the producers, circa 1982, to play us out.